Inspector Akane Tsunemori reporting for duty, sir.
What a farce. They promised a society managed by fair and impartial machine intelligence.
The law doesn't protect people. People protect the law.
Well, this quote may have passed me by the first time. Once I sat down and actually contemplated the importance of Akane to psychopaths, it has never left my head. That statement is so against traditional thinking it seems nonsensical, and something to be brushed off as a simple ear-catch line the writers threw in. But encapsulated within that reaction is the exact importance of such a statement, and it hits hard at psychopaths' messaging. From its very first moments, the anime starts down a long and winding path at breaking down our notion of the law. For us, the law seems to be very concrete and definite. It has buildings which house agents of its enforcements. They have the power to hold you for violating it, and in some places, the law can even be enforced to take your life. There are budget meetings that struggle to decide how much is enough, and none of them, whatever their intention, have ever succeeded in removing the traditional physicality of the law. Everyone who I know has been born inside of this version of the law, and anything outside of it just seems like fiction. Psychopaths takes these aspects and many more, but shows how they can be applied not just to men with weapons, but to machines in our own minds. While a human presence still exists within the law of 2112 Japan, its role is done mostly via drones and scanners. And the policing itself isn't punishing certain acts, but preventing them from even happening. All the decisions are made from the collection of brains known as Sibyl, or as far as the public knows, an advanced supercomputer. Clearly this law and its enforcement is different from our own, yet it's utilized in the same way. By showcasing the same successes and failures of the law in a non-physical form, one which requires no actual action for punishment, Psychopaths crafts a tale which can teach us a lot about the truth of the law, its value, its bastardization by corruption, our need to defend it, and so much more. Today we'll look at just how it does that and what it can all mean for us. Psychopath shows that the law doesn't exist how we usually think it does. With such a physical presence, whether it's drones like in the anime or officers like most of us see, it's easy to begin to see the law as something physical itself, a set of regulations written down which exist and dictate our behavior by their existence. But this is entirely false. First, let's look at how it's false within Psychopaths. From the start, we witness on many occasions that there isn't a set of rules known as the law in this future Japan. From Masaoka remembering a time when they got rid of juvenile laws, to the lack of gates or locks on dangerous areas or facilities, to the very fact an officer watches a murder but can't arrest the murderer. Because these things are judged based on intent rather than outcome, or said another way, because its enforcement is proactive rather than reactive, crime isn't judged on physical happenstance. It's judged on the intentions of that person, something widely abstract and variant. Obviously, with the existence of criminal asymptomism, this is needlessly apparent. The same action willed by different people leads to different results. We can even see this with Akane and how often she performs actions which would, as everyone around her believes, surely lead to latent criminality. Really, the only thing that defines criminality in this world, when you know the truth of Sibyl, is what Sibyl wants to be a criminal. That's what's so crucial about exchanges just like this in Psychopaths.
There's a good conversation starter. How do we define criminal? Maybe that dominator you're holding.
Crime coefficient under 50. Enforcement action not required.
They show that with human subjectivity, there is no real definition of the word criminal. And then Sibyl shows how subjectivity and bias can actually be included within the law. Criminal asymptomism is a flaw of their system, of their thinking, so isn't it possible that this is actually their unconscious bias to people who are just like them, and basically giving them a free pass? Clearly they view Makishima as worthy of their status, which they view as godhood. He exhibits some of these same qualities, and so they could judge him to be innocent with that bias. We can also look at the judgment of Kamui from Season 2. Some parts of Sibyl don't recognize him as human, and thus don't judge him, but then others do. So they purge those who do not, and then pass a judgment from there. Even to itself, Sibyl, and thus the law of this world, is subjective. Law here is based on the whims of a few, but it's enforced anyway. It doesn't exist in writing anywhere, but it's enforced anyway. It isn't even a thought in the head of most, but it's enforced anyway. What the anime is getting at here is that just because we see the law a certain way doesn't mean that it actually exists. Just because we may be raised under it our whole lives, see it only a certain way and believe it to be so, doesn't actually make it so. And if we look closer, the aspects of psychopaths parallel our own world. While we may extensively write down our laws with careful language to try and dictate the exact balance where good and bad meet, this doesn't actually make the law so in practice. Speeding is obviously a crime, but the officer who pulls you over can decide to let you off with just a warning. A 2021 survey found that simply saying "I didn't know I was speeding" had a 26% success rate in receiving a warning rather than a ticket. A crime was committed, but with a few words, it resulted in no punishment. Even though we codify our laws, they don't enforce themselves and rely on agents to do so. This introduces subjectivity and in turn creates a situation where no definite law actually exists. At most, it's a set of guidelines which sometimes aren't even followed from there. Even with extensive and carefully crafted texts, subjectivity can never be removed. Our law in reality is no more defined than what we see in Psycho-Pass. For better or for worse, they're each crafted and enforced by simple human minds. Another frightening truth explored in Psycho-Pass is that the law is not just subjective, but in actuality, exceptionally weak. This is why the riots are much more than just a ploy by Shogo Makishima, but an integral part of the anime itself. You can see what we're about to discuss all over the anime, but it's made most obvious here. When the helmets reach the general public, the full extent of just how weak the Sibyl System, or the law of this world, is shown. Starting off, the riots is an exploit of Sibyl. The helmets aren't hiding or altering a person's hue, but copying that of someone else's nearby. Based on how Sibyl gathers its data, it presented a flaw to be exploited. And with this flaw discovered, all hell broke loose because there was no immediate response to crimes in broad daylight. They only learned of the acts because of the crime coefficients of those nearby, meaning they had a chance to propagate through society. This is due to the fact that Sibyl had such a minimal presence which is capable of critical thinking in its immediate response. With so many preventative measures, scanners, drones, and so on, and so few reactive measures like inspectors and enforcers, they were caught in a bind. You can see this plain as day in their meeting to discuss the riots, a mostly empty room being told to tend to an entire city, 17 people. That's the standing force they have available for this event. And from there, they're given a minimal amount of equipment to replace their now useless dominators. Sibyl gives each agent a mere 2 EMP grenades to help solve their situation, and outright admits that
the MWPSB has neither the personnel nor the equipment to efficiently suppress a mob.
The law is weak and doesn't actually have a way to enforce itself on everyone. If everyone stopped deciding to follow the laws, then the law would have no power of them, and that's exactly what we see in these riots. Meanwhile, Makishima and Che Gusung are breaking into Nona Tower in an attempt to uncover the truth of the Sibyl System. It's always struck me as odd how Che determined the location of Sibyl. He calls out what seem to be quite shallow covers for its facade.
The data appeared to be processed throughout the grid, but it was actually just being passed from one place to another untouched. A single relay point that every communication goes through at least once. Plus, there are clear traces of the power consumption in this area being faked.
It doesn't seem like Sibyl had actually fully covered for itself, but more like it was relying on the fact that no one was looking. Like when someone puts no effort into a lie because they knew it wouldn't be pressed. And to keep up this appearance, they also couldn't heavily reinforce or guard Nona Tower, allowing the devious pair to simply walk in the front door and uncover changed blueprints which gave away its true location in the building and then allowed itself to be hacked and entered by Che. Che's existence in general, along with others like Masatake, is a point of weakness for Sibyl as well, given they aren't asymptomatic but just plan their paths around scanners to remain hidden in plain sight. These are outright mistakes by Sibyl, but then at the end of the day, Sibyl is just a select group of individuals, just as fallible as anyone else, no matter how smart. All of this together paints a picture of a system which is not existing out of strength, but existing out of covering its weakness to appear strong.
When I was her age, I had the same belief in justice and society's need for a good detective.
Do it now. Kill him.
In order for those prayers to hold meaning, we have to protect the law.
Once again, art imitates reality. We may not have helmets that let you do as you please, but really, is it that hard to just do as you please? In Psycho-Pass, we witness the limited number of personnel, and the fact that those who are aware can avoid what is there. it isn't really that much different for us. An astounding 112 million US drivers self-reported driving while alcohol impaired when surveyed. Sounds insane, right? Well, it gets worse when we consider that somewhere around 1.4 million arrests are made each year for drunk driving. That's only 1.25% of alcohol-impaired driving being caught. You have a 99% chance of getting away with drunk driving because through our traditional method of law enforcement, it's simply impossible to be anywhere and everywhere at once to respond to it. And then if you kept track of the departments you'd have to pass through, when they changed shifts, or where they usually sat, you could change that from a 99% chance to an essential 100% chance of breaking the law, similar to avoiding the scanners and psychopaths. And like how Sibyl made mistakes out of essentially human error, so can our agents of enforcement. Confirmation bias is a great example of this. It's something present in all of us. It is defined as the tendency to gather evidence that confirms pre-existing expectations, typically by emphasizing or pursuing supporting evidence, while dismissing or failing to seek contradictory evidence. For some personal anecdotal evidence, this happened to every engineer I met constantly. When an issue arises, you begin looking for the problem in one area you already believe the problem to be in and miss the obvious solution, like forgetting to plug it in. In Psychopaths, it's like Ginoza hating latent criminals and ignoring their theories for his own. Think about how their cases were hindered by his failure to explore other possibilities. Much like in the anime, confirmation bias can have grave consequences when it comes to the law. Confirmation bias often leads to case building instead of fact gathering, where the investigator filters their perspective of evidence in a case through the lens provided by a conclusion of guilt. This in turn can lead to failure to gather sufficient evidence, ignoring evidence contrary to one's theory, and on the whole a skewed investigation leading to wrongful convictions. Since 1973, 185 former death row prisoners have been exonerated of all charges related to wrongful convictions that placed them on death row. A simple error of the human brain has led people to losing decades of their lives, or worse, losing their lives entirely. And like we mentioned earlier, the law isn't just weak, but also non-concrete, which adds to its weakness. Sometimes it's not unconscious bias, but just active bias. It's very possible for the law to be lenient on those who commit serious crimes based on outside factors, and harsh on those who commit minor or no crime at all based on the same reasoning. Well, it's possible for them to also punish fairly. If they do happen to skew this so much to one side they were harsher on those who committed no crime or minor ones than those who committed serious ones, our manifestation of the law could actually increase the effect of crime overall. You could say this is like what Sibyl does in letting Makishima run rampant even after witnessing his actions firsthand. It's no coincidence that an anime obsessed with society drew these parallels to discuss just how weak the law can really be. But this leads us to an important question. If the law is really so weak, how is it enforced? How does it gain the power to be enforced? Well, most of it is done through appearance. Let's look at the anime once again. Before Makishima, the things we witnessed weren't even in the minds of 2112 Japan. There were a few odd cases, like our introductory one, but most of them were like the case from episode 2, very procedural with little fuss. And even the first case only spread to involve 2 people from one, although that doesn't alleviate the terrible nature of it. As far as the people are concerned though, the system works and that's that. Nothing happens because from what they've seen and been told, it would be caught, so they don't try. This cyclical mindset allows for a majority lack of crime, not because of the effectiveness of the system, but the belief that the system is functioning that way.
It's more important we merely believe it's so than the Sibyl System does function perfectly every time a crime's committed.
To look at how Sibyl succeeds in this way, it's best to see how they pulled success from failure in the riots. We've already covered how ill-prepared they were for them, but the public wasn't aware of this. In fact, most of them are ignorant of their law enforcement or its process on the whole. They even say things like,
"It said if you're acting in self-defense or you're hurting a criminal, then your crime coefficient will actually go down."
What this shows is that they don't actually know how it works, they just know it did, and it isn't right now. So when the MWPSB comes rolling in and manages to take a large portion of them out with one of their very few grenades, it reestablishes the image that the law is working. As far as the rioters are concerned, the PSB could let loose hundreds of those grenades. But in actuality, if they split into groups so they couldn't all be hit at once, stuck near critical systems so that the EMP grenades couldn't even be used, and persisted with their numbers, they could have easily succeeded. The only thing on Sibyl's side here was appearance. If the law had looked weak for years, then it would have been weak. But for these people's entire lives, it looked strong, so here it seemed to be strong. These riots on the whole show just how weak the law can be, but we have to consider that there's two groups at play here distinguished by their intentions. There's those who began the riots, those with the helmets, and those who sought to end the riots by, well, rioting themselves. Not the best methods, but their intention was to restore law. For this next section, when I say rioters, I'll generally be referring to this group, the counter-rioters. And this group is the perfect example of how we have to balance action and complacency to both protect the law because it is weak and also make sure we don't destroy the law with our own intention. This counter-rioting isn't about breaking the law, it's about saving it, at least as best as they could. What those helmets did allowed those who wanted to bypass the law to do so, but we have to ask what drove the response. I think this could only be a want to maintain some idea of the law. What they witnessed was really a failure of the law, a moment where it ceased to work in a violent way. This hit many of the sparking factors for protest: lack of trust in authority, shared grievances, and survival triggers. The helmets were a trigger based on these feelings. While their methods may have been barbaric, the response is to punish those who went against the spirit of the law. If Sibyl could no longer provide the safety they received in exchange for a sacrifice of free will, then a temporary fix would need to be established. It's a sort of anarchistic justice. For the good of the many they can witness, they kill the few providing danger. This on a larger scale would lead to the auto-cannibalism of society, but to destroy immediate danger, at least in their minds, it does the job. They have the power to destroy the law, and even do so, but in the end, they choose not to. The thing holding the law together isn't anything about itself, it's the want of the people to be under the law. They had proper intentions, but allowed those intentions to manifest into life-taking, a last resort saved only for the most dire of situations. But even when things progress this far, once Sibyl shows a capacity for control again, they give up this easily and return to the prior system. And as far as we can see, their society returns to normal fairly easily following this, even if the scars do happen to stay. Now, protests often end over time due to a lack of energy, but these were relatively quick, so we can't put it down to that. The shock of the initial event is also nowhere near over, so that's out as well. A forceful response did somewhat happen, but as we said, they could have recognized the flawed response and kept going. I think the only reason these ended was because the people saw their reason for rioting as itself having ended. The law they wished for was restored, and given the lack of this mobilization yielding long-term organization, I'd argue that point is even stronger. This isn't the resilience of a system such as Sibyl, this is the resilience of the people who are under it and their collective wishes for a better tomorrow, also called the law. Going back to the cyclical nature of Sibyl's power and seeing just how easily it can fall and then be returned, we can only conclude that there's a want for their law in this society. They don't find flaws in Sibyl or search for its hardly hidden secrets because they don't want to. As far as they know, Sibyl is just for most, if unfair to some. A small minority pay for the happiness of the majority, but remember the inclusion of as far as they know.
People have prayed for a better world since the dawn of time.
But now, rather than me, it's them who've become the savage, bloodthirsty beasts.
Sure is ironic. The way I've conducted myself ever since. It was all to avoid his fate, yet here I am.
Now, I've played devil's advocate before for Sibyl, arguing mostly that the complacency of society is what led to the unjust treatment of latent criminals. And to some extent, that is true. But we have to acknowledge that society isn't privy to the entire picture. As far as they know means exactly that. They don't know that Sibyl is actually unjust and biased like anyone else, that it traded their safety for an attempt at the life of a single man, and that it manipulates and abuses others to that end. Just like appearance is necessary for enforcement of the law, it is for belief in it as well. It's important to note that even Sibyl recognizes its true form would lead to its collapse.
Exposure of the truth remains the most statistically significant danger to our stewardship.
If people begin to lose faith in the law, see not that it is weak, but also that it is unjust, then the law again will begin to crumble unless action is taken to right it. We've already shown that the law can be overridden by people. What changes here is simply the reason why, and the option that didn't happen in Psycho-Pass, because their society was complacent to some degree. But we have to ask why they allowed themselves to become complacent. It wasn't indifference, but for the same reason they gave up the riots, because of a desire for the law to govern them under the idea that it would be fully just. People don't give up this much free will believing they're following an unjust system. This is a failure of the people, but an understandable one. They simply wanted peace and safety and found it in the lies of Sibyl, which then took hold over society with an authoritarian grip, using laws which should not be called so since they go against the wishes of society. Simply questioning the ruler became a crime, and Sibyl sealed its place as the god of the new world. The law of psychopaths is a bastardized state of being, one which arose from misplaced complacency derived from lies. So in the anime, we witness both the good and evil of complacency through a desire for law, how easily it can lead to security or order, and how those same feelings can be exploited for the power of the corrupt and evil. You could call a summary of this the status quo, a one for the continuation of how things are. If things are fair and equitable, this can be good, but if not, it can lead to only more injustice. Just as it's a problem in psychopaths, it is for us as well. We've already covered how our law, like theirs, can be skewed, but what about when this skew targets a certain minority of the population? Say 15% of a population is being treated unfairly. Then a further 15% may be different from them, but see these issues and take offense, beginning to push for change with that group. But if it's 70% that is unaffected and has no personal incentive to care, we reach an impasse. There's injustice, but in a desire to maintain what appears to be working for them, they have the option to do nothing. With no complacency, we reach barbaric anarchy, but with rampant complacency, we agree to abide by injustice. Law which persists, serving only to detriment some, isn't true law. It's merely a bastardized use of its name driven by the status quo. Much like in the anime, some of this is a fault of society, while some is mismanagement from above. Through exhaustion at the toll of daily life, the status quo becomes an appealing option. When citizens have low energy from obligations, they have even less energy to push for change based on a moral appeal. Purposeful inefficiencies, direct barriers to involvement, and excessive responsibility can be employed as a sort of mental taxation, which doesn't threaten or directly harm a majority, but instead forces them to lose morale. You could say Sibyl's version of this is the avoidance of stress in a weird way. Because questioning of the system is usually a factor for latent criminality, it becomes taxing to question it, and thus a status quo is forced. Complacency becomes a very harsh balancing act when we consider the law. So we've seen what the law is, how it's weak, how it appears strong, how we give it power, and how we can give it too much. But what ties it all together? Like so much else in Psycho-Pass, its common point is Akane. Akane, who gives us this initial idea of the law.
The accumulation of society's feelings are the law.
Akane, who follows the law not because of consequences or perceived strength, but because she knows it can be right to do so. Akane, who pushes back peacefully when the law falters. Akane, who finds the importance of coming to terms with the intersection of yourself and the law. Akane, who succeeds. At the end of the day, Akane is the most successful character in the anime relative to her position. She finds the intersection, acknowledges the good that's within Sibyl, the stability and happiness and peace, but rejects the parts of it which have no business being law, the unfair treatment and the lies. She rejects those aspects with a vigor, refuses to become complacent because the law is good enough or appears strong, but instead recognizes that it is neither of those things, and fights for it anyway. Fights for it because it's weak, fights for a better version of it for the sake of everyone without losing what we've gained. As Kogami admits, Akane is the ideal citizen.
If there ever comes a time when everyone feels the way you do, the Sibyl System will disappear.
She's a rejection of most characters, Kogami's selfishness, Makishima's chaos, and Sibyl's corruption, but at the same time she also embodies positive qualities of them all, Kogami's determination, Makishima's awareness, and Sibyl's peace. Akane is balance, and that's what we should take from Psycho-Pass.
We have to protect the law, that promise of a better world, to the very end.
Shall we allow the Sibyl System, that which governs it, to decide what I am?
Enforcing laws unworthy of protection is a betrayal of that pact.
Like Akane ties together the anime, we must tie together our own reality. We have to recognize that yes, the law is exceptionally weak. We have to recognize that we could so easily break it if we wanted to, and based on that decision, choose not to. We discussed here today just how much these things from an anime apply to our real life, but most of us are lawful even knowing these facts, because the law is protected by us deciding to protect it. The thing keeping peace isn't police officers or guns, the thing keeping peace is our desire for peace itself. It's important to recognize this fact that we protect a supremely weak law because we must not grow overly complacent like Sibyl society. If we give in to injustice and lies because it's convenient, we enter down an uncontrollable spiral which will one day consume us too. Think about it, Sibyl even purges their own eventually. When things are unjust, we must fight against them with vigor. However, we must always keep this desire in check. The counter-rioters are shown to fail for a reason. If we decide that in protecting the law we ourselves become it, then we reach just another bastardization of it. But we also must not be so against complacency that we tie ourselves into it. Some fights aren't worth the cost. Just as destroying Sibyl would destroy its society, we must not reject everything and undo the great progress of humanity, but instead we must focus our energy on the points that matter, the ones that are true to the law, the collective wishes for a better future. Awareness is emphasized in Psycho-Pass for a reason, both personal and societal, because the law dies when no one is looking. When we avert our eyes is when it's stolen away. Even when things seem unending and cyclical like the ending Akane faces, if we give up, then the situation can only get worse. Vigor and morale are the true stuff of the law. Maintain those qualities because we need them to protect the law. Appearance is important because not everyone will attempt to be a lawful citizen. For those who don't, the law needs to appear powerful. Even when it can't catch everyone, it needs to catch the egregious offenders as an example. We ourselves should not undertake this task, as again, a forceful installation of yourself as the law is the stuff of childish narcissists. But we should push for those who are selected for the task to do so, and to do so with an energy that matches our own in the spirit of true law. Equitable, fair, and just for everyone. This is more important now than ever.
Hi there, if you're watching this video as it came out, then you're seeing an outro that was recorded about 2 hours ago. Because this is being finished very much at the end here. I thought this would be quicker than it was, but like normal I went overboard and kind of put a bit too much into it and tried to fit way too much into one video. So I just spent a lot of time trying to clear it up, and I hope it was clear in the end. I hope it wasn't a confusing video in any way, although I do think there are some points that could be more clear, where as simple as just applying a label to some of the things I talked about between the anime and real life would have been a lot better, and I wish I had more time to do that, but I physically don't. But I think I managed to kind of save it in the end, and I hope that you think so as well, because I think it's a good video. I think there's a lot in here that's very important. There's a lot I cut out at the end that was just angry ranting that came right after I said this is more important now than ever, because it is. Because we've witnessed a lot of lawless shit over the past 4 to 5 years, and if we don't do anything about it, if we don't maintain that appearance, and if we don't ourselves protect the law and become complacent, then it will die. And a lot of things die with the law, like democracy dies with the law. So that's why I made this video. Why I made a rough draft of it very late one night that was just mad ramblings, and why I tried to fix it here. So that's another reason why it's a little bit all over the place at times, because it was written very late at night in a lot of emotion. But it's something I'm passionate about, and I hope that came out here as well. Anyway, I'm rambling a lot when I don't have much time. I physically have to go put this in and export it, so I shouldn't be rambling, but I can't quite help myself. So important links in the pinned comment, Patreon, Twitter, Discord. Most importantly, Patreon. There'll be some amazing people's names on screen now. I think I'll just put them on instead of doing my usual end screen. And I'll also have in the description of some variety either a link to my script, which has the links in it, or just directly the links to my sources for this video, for the things you saw appearing on screen, and just for some of the background reading on it as well, because again, this is an important topic, and I encourage you to think about how it affects you in your own life, and do research to see just how real some of these things are in your own time as well, because it is very important. But anyway, thank you to the patrons as always. Those important links, those things in the description, subscribe thing, a couple of videos on screen now. I'll say thank you for sticking with me through these mad ramblings, through a very passionate video, and I hope I'll see you again soon.